Will we meet again, my dearest students, all 110 of you enrolled in a variety of courses at a couple of different universities here in the city of Rome, Roma, Italia, the Eternal City. So this is dedicated to those enrolled in RL 221, Popes of Rome, History of the Catholic Church. On your worksheet, this corresponds to this particular lecture session, corresponds to week 6.1. And where we left off the last time we were all in aula, in our classroom, together, the last week of February. And we perhaps very fittingly ended with the collapse of the Roman Empire in the year 476, or at least, to be technically accurate, the Western Roman Empire in 476. So that's where we're going to pick up the pieces, if you will. And this first little intro is actually how I left you, but I think it bears that I repeat it because it will help to contextualize the next few lecture sessions into which we are about to enter. So if you look at your worksheet, again, week 6.1, Rome's fall and metamorphosis, okay? Roman numeral 1, or number 1, the Dark Ages, which for our purpose in this course last from the year 476 until the year 800. Why 476? Because, I will repeat it again, it was in the year 476 that the Ostrogothic barbarian, so-called chieftain, Odoacer, deposed the Western Roman emperor, ironically named Romulus Augustulus. Ironic because, again, Romulus, founder of Rome, Augustus, the first Roman emperor. 476. Now, you will recall, again, contextualization, so you should already have this in your notes. If you don't, maybe take notes on this, but just for context. So we said very early on in the course that the population of the city of Rome, right, the city of Rome, at the time of Emperor Nero, again, under Emperor Nero, in the year 64, a couple thousand members of the Christian community, including their leader, Simon Peter, were executed in the Vatican circus. The population of the city of Rome was about 250,000 inhabitants. That includes not only Roman citizens, but everyone else. Members of the slave class, the servi, itinerants, that is, workers coming in and out of the city, bringing goods and services up the river Tiber, and along the Via Appia. Okay, so the population of the city of Rome, middle of the first century, 250,000 inhabitants. Just the city. Only 70 years later, by the time Emperor Hadrian is building the Pantheon in the said city center, the population of the city of Rome exploded to, at the very least, 1 million inhabitants. Now, recently, in the past couple of decades, some historians have argued that that number may have been even closer to as many as 3 million inhabitants. Again, if you include those who were not Roman citizens, so freedmen, freedwomen, the slave class, and again, itinerant workers who were working the river docks along the Tiber River, etc., as well as the immediate surrounding suburbs of the city of Rome. We, and by we I mean me, we tend to think that the number is not exaggeratedly, probably closer to 3 million. But let's take the conservative. It's always better to take the conservative estimate. Right? Let's say 1 million inhabitants. Okay. When the Roman Empire falls in 476, for the next millennium, that means 1,000 years, 1,000 years, the population of the city of Rome will fluctuate at any given moment anywhere between 5 to, at best, 50,000 inhabitants. One reason: the aqueducts. It was under Emperor Nero, technically his uncle Emperor Claudius shortly before him, but really Nero finished the job. It was the aqueducts. It was the middle of the first century that the great construction project of the aqueducts was finished in the city of Rome, bringing on a 24/7 basis fresh, potable, drinkable, free water to every inhabitant in the city of Rome, from the poorest to the poor to the wealthiest of the wealthy. Every segment of society had 24/7 access to what is one of human society's most essential basic needs for survival, right? All right. In the 5th century, the 400s, following a couple of different famous sacks of the many sacks of Rome, in the 5th century, the 400s, a couple of different so-called barbarian groups, namely the Vandals and the Visigoths, cut the aqueducts, tore huge sections of them down. Suddenly, there's no urban security left. So what are you doing sticking around in a city that cannot even, at the very least, protect you? You don't have access to a basic human need, namely water, so you're going to flee. Yeah. And those aqueducts would remain incapacitated, would not be hooked back up again until the very end of the Italian Papal Rinascimento, right? Renaissance, the rebirth of picking up where the ancient Romans left off. And that only began in the very late 1500s, the 1580s, really. And for better and for worse, it was thanks to the popes. Okay, so for 1,000 years, a millennium, human civilization, it's gone, it's collapsed. So even though there are a lot of what some might describe as revisionist historians trying to portray the medieval period, the Middle Ages, as somehow quaint, they were pretty dark. Pretty dark. That leads us then to Roman numeral 1, or number 1 here, the Dark Ages, 476 to 800, and just one more clarification. So historians like to debate, when did the Middle Ages, when did that period begin? When did it end? A lot of debate on this, especially because university professors, researchers have to publish or perish. For our purposes in this course, the popes of Rome, the history and theology of the papacy, the history of the Catholic Church. The medieval period runs between the year 476, the collapse of the ancient Roman Empire, until the year 1431, for reasons we'll come to later on. in a future lecture session. The Dark Ages, specifically the Dark Ages, for our purposes, extend again from the collapse of the Western Roman Empire, 476, until the year 800. And the reason for that we will discover both in this lecture session and in the next lecture session. Now, why are they called the Middle Ages, the medieval period? Medievalis, right? Simply a Latin term for middle age. So if it's a middle age, it means it's a period of time, an age, which occurred between a previous age and a following age. The previous age being the ancient Roman world, classical antiquity. The following period being the rebirth of the ancient world, hence the French term Renaissance, or the Italian term Rinascimento, right? In English, rebirth. That is picking up where the ancient world, where the ancient Romans left off, when everything collapsed in 476. The Dark Ages, specifically from the year 476 to the year 800. For better and for worse, it is more arguable than not that the singular institution that preserved the ancient world, and by that we mean everything, its philosophy, its literature, its art, its ability to do these things, and even its science and technology, all of this was preserved through an invention in the former Western Roman Empire following its collapse in 476, known as the monastery, monasticism. Now, the word monasticism or monastery or monk comes from the Greek word monos, which you will recall from previous lectures, you already know, means one or alone. That is, living as one. This is not something unique. This concept is not something unique to Christianity or the Catholic Church or any other denomination of Christianity. This is a prevalent phenomenon that courses through a lot of different religious traditions around the world. That is the idea of living alone to somehow get in touch with oneself interiorly and or transcendentally, metaphysically, something beyond this physical reality that surrounds us. Okay. Again, going back to simply and purely the Christian perspective here, and obviously the Roman Catholic tradition, there are two forms that this takes in the Christian tradition already in the very first few centuries following the life and times of Jesus of Nazareth. It's born out of a community, a Semitic community in the greater Jerusalem area known as the Essenes. You'll see this name and term and throughout the Christian New Testament, which was basically, I guess, I don't know, in the 60s or 70s would have been thought of as kind of like a hippie commune, right? Everybody has a common purpose, and they're living on their own, and they have a certain goal and ideologies. In this case, it would be Mosaic law and trying to live that authentically and purely, etc. Right? This is where, in the Christian tradition, it's born from the Essene communities. Probably John the Baptist was a member of the community, and it certainly stands to bear that the historical figure, Jesus of Nazareth, would have had at least some interaction with this community. If not himself, a member. In any event, this leads to then two developments already beginning in the 2nd and certainly by the 3rd century in early Christianity. two developments within this now monasticism, right? The eremitic and the cenobitic. Eremitic, from the Greek term eremos, meaning desert. Famously, the founder of this form of Christian monasticism is a guy named Anthony of Egypt, or also Anthony of the Desert. Right? And it's the idea that one does it completely on one's own. One goes off on one's own to live in a cave or a hut on top of a big column, right? But by oneself. So the purest form of monasticism. And this develops predominantly throughout the eastern portion of the Roman Empire in the 3rd and 4th century, so before still the collapse of the Western Roman Empire in 476. The other form of monasticism that develops within Christianity is cenobitic, from the Greek term for the common language in Greek spoken at the time, koine, also the Italian term cena. What is cena? It's having dinner, presumably, together in communally. Okay, so cenobitic. And to be accurate, historically, there are already monks in the eastern portion of the Roman Empire, famously two guys named Macarius and Pachomius in the 4th century that had introduced this idea of living, keeping that ideal of being alone, but somehow doing it together. Rightly so, this form of monasticism, cenobitic, takes off in the late 4th, early 5th centuries with a guy named Benedict of Nursia in Latin, or Norcia in Italian. Norcia, Nursia, it's a town about a couple hours north of Rome. We had a very bad earthquake there several years ago. Anyway, I digress. So cenobitic. And this guy Benedict, he came from a patrician, ancient Roman noble family. And he said, yeah, that's nice and all, the idea of Anthony of the Desert, doing it all completely on your own, living in a cave or on top of a column, whatever. But the Roman Empire has just collapsed. And if we're going to, in any way, try to conserve what we can of civilization, we may have more success doing it together, communally, right? Strength in numbers, that kind of idea. And so that's why Benedict of Norcia, Benedict of Nursia, Saint Benedict is credited with creating what would eventually become the famous medieval form of monasticism, Western monasticism, in the Christian tradition, and more specifically, the Roman Catholic Church. Benedict said, you know what, this needs to be a full-blown group effort here. So, all right, we no longer have security. My name is Benedict. I'm actually from an ancient Roman patrician family. I have money, I have land. So I'm going to convert my family's lands, their properties, their structures, into monasteries, which is where we're going to engage in this endeavor. We're going to grow our own stuff, vegetables, fruits, orchards, whatever we can. We'll have, hopefully, land set aside for livestock, for grazing animals, chicken coops. And we will basically maintain ourselves together because we're stronger in numbers. And we'll see what happens. The final thing is that obviously we're not just trying to survive, but we're trying to, again, pick up from where ancient civilization collapsed with the fall of the Roman Empire in 476. Consequently, It's the monastery system in the Christian tradition which will introduce, or reintroduce, perhaps, a better way to say it, the ancient Roman schola, the school system. And the monks did this based on at the time, the typical ancient Roman classical model. Two-track system. Trivium and quadrivium. Trivium, take a wild guess. Three things. Yeah, 3 disciplines, 3 faculties. Logic, grammar, and rhetoric. Logic. What's the most important? We're trying to reboot civilization. Where do you begin? Where do you begin? I ask you, where do you begin? If you're going to reboot civilization, I'm asking you, where do you begin? Think about it. Well, the monks, following the ancient classical example, said, you know what? First of all, we need to know, we need to understand, we need to learn how to think. Of course, today that concept has been bastardized with the cliche of critical thinking. What it really means is logic, which is what the ancients called it, logic. If I'm going to do anything, I first of all need to grasp how to think so that I'm not just spouting nonsense, which is going to it's not going to get any of us anywhere. Okay. So logic. Well, okay, that's fine. Now I know how to think, but it's so important that I need to be able to communicate that to other people. And I need to do it in a logical way, a rational way that is comprehensible to other people. So how do I do that? Get what's in my mind into your mind through language, but it just can't be mumbo jumbo. It needs to be comprehensible. Consequently, the second discipline of the trivium, grammar, being able to put these logical, rational concepts together comprehensibly, which can and will then be communicated comprehensibly. Okay. Thirdly, I'm sure you're already bored out of your minds watching this, following this. I respect that. But it's one thing to, pontificate from a cathedra, from a department chair or whatever position in a classroom or whatever, just me, right? It's another thing to do it, or to try to do it engagingly, persuade you, because I not only have to get you to understand what I'm telling you, I need you to get on board, because this is about preserving civilization. I need you on board. I need you to be persuasive. So I need to have a little bit of style or panache or whatever, which the ancients, continued by the medieval monks, called rhetoric, the art of public speaking, which unfortunately in a lot of communications classes these days is reduced to watching Pink Floyd videos. I digress. So the art of communicating. Yeah? Okay. Now, once you have mastered the trivium, right, the first track in the schola, now you get to move on to the second track. You're privileged to move on to the second track. And by privileged, I don't mean in the contemporary sense of privilege. I mean, you've earned it. The quadrivium, 4 things. So if the trivium we could characterize as kind of the theory behind everything, right? The quadrivium is the practical application of all this stuff, right? Okay, I get it. It's in my head. I'm able to communicate it, but okay, now, so what are we going to do? And what are we going to do? Quadrivium, 4 disciplines. I ask you once again, you're trying to reboot civilization, not to mention preserve it, conserve it. Where do you start? What would be the first discipline, faculty that you would think is important to learn how to do? Yeah? Food? No, that's a given, because without food, you're going to die. So that's a given. Think ahead, right? And don't think idealistically. Remember, always think extremely cynically, pragmatically, practically. Remember the very beginning of the course. Remember the 3 systems that develop once a human society gets together. What was the first system? The oikonomia, the system. But the economy, because it's about this, right? Money makes the world go round. Okay. In other words, in the quadrivium, the first discipline that I am going to make sure I learn is arithmetic. I got to make sure I know how to count my money. I got to make sure I know how to multiply and divide, add and subtract, especially to make sure that the next person is not ripping me off. Okay, so arithmetic. Now, I got so much money that I cannot even fit it under my straw-filled mattress anymore. So I want a bigger mattress, if you will, or a bigger space, even a building where I can store it. How am I going to construct a building? Second discipline in the quadrivium. What do I need? What does an architect need, or an engineer for that matter? What do you need? 16 years old, remember? High school? Geometry. Okay. Now we're still in the Dark Ages here, the very early medieval period. Right? And I now have so much money that I might like to spend it elsewhere. Maybe go on a cruise. Of course, the medieval period, those were referred to as crusades. Why crusades? To access the Holy Land. We'll get to that later in a later lecture session. In any event, how am I going to, how do I get there? How do I get there? Well, today you might say, oh, I just Google it. Okay, well, we don't have Google. We don't have smartphones. It's the Dark Ages, the medieval period. So how else are you going to do it? No, not a map either. No maps, and the few that we have, they're gone. So how are you going to do it? We're going to do it by following the stars. How do you navigate? You want to get from Bath, England, to Babylon, in Mesopotamia, Baghdad, Iraq. How are you going to do that? By navigating the waters. Land travel, it's long, cumbersome, much more unsafe. We're going to take a ship. We're going to take a boat. And in order to do that, we're going to have to follow the stars. So the third discipline in the quadrivium is astrology, which at the time the term was concomitant with the intention with astronomy, right? Being able to read the stars, read the skies in order to navigate our way to our destination. Okay, that leaves us with the fourth and final discipline. We're on a boat going from Bath, England to Beirut, Lebanon, right? It's a long boat ride. It can get pretty boring. What would be one source of distraction? Entertainment, if you will. Think about what you do perhaps when you leave your classroom. Earbuds in, maybe you're listening to a podcast or music, So yeah, music. That's the fourth discipline. And what makes music good? The fourth discipline in the quadrivium. What makes music good music? Why do you like one song versus another? What makes music good? Harmony, harmonics, which is based, once again, on arithmetic and geometry. So that's not a coincidence. Okay. So that wraps up the Roman numeral 1 here on the on your worksheets. And we'll pick back up when we discuss the medieval universitas, the university, its invention, in a later lecture session. We have so far covered now 4 ecumenical councils in the history of Christianity and the history of the Roman Catholic Church. Roman numeral number 2. Constantinople II, or the Second Council of Constantinople, held in the year 553 in the new capital city itself of Constantinople. And so it's the 5th ecumenical council now, out of a total of 21, in the history of Christianity, history of the Catholic Church. This is the year 553. The emperor is Justinian I. And for our purposes in this course, what does this council decide to do? Well, the first thing is, this is really strange, but it's the first time, believe it or not, as much as we've talked previously in the course lectures about Roman law, the emphasis on Roman law, how many aspects of Christianity, Christian theology, etc., come out of Roman law, right? Practices within the church. It's the first time that Roman law is universally codified. And it's called the Codex Iuris Civilis, the Code of Civil Law, or sometimes referred to as Justinian's Code because he was the emperor. All right. That's the first point. The second point is there were a lot of continuing problems, as we've already discussed in previous lecture sessions with the other ecumenical councils, regarding this tension back and forth between Arianism and Nicene Christianity, Arian Christianity and Nicene Christianity. And even more specific, sort of almost for our purposes, a bit mundane, minutiae, details, we're not going to get into. But there are 2 that crop up in particular at this time that you will see very